The Pinnacle and the Fall. Introducing Emily Carter. Emily Carter stands at the glass window of her Manhattan corner office, surveying the city that once intimidated her, but now pulses with possibilities. Barely 30, Emily is the youngest vice president at Helix Financial Technologies, a cutting-edge fintech corporation known for its cutthroat culture. Her resume gleams with Ivy League credentials and unicorn startup experience. Emily isn't just brilliant, she's magnetic, a leader whose energy inspires her team and whose strategic foresight has saved multi-million-dollar accounts. Be the inner circle and office dynamics. At her side is Jake Miller, her best friend from college, now her trusted right hand at Helix. Their history is filled with late-night brainstorming, mutual career boosts, and unwavering loyalty, or so Emily believes. The company's executive floor is a battlefield of ambition. While Emily enjoys a reputation as Helix's golden girl, backstabbing and one-upmanship simmer beneath the surface. Mentors, adversaries, and protégés populate Emily's world. Layla Higgins, a sharp-witted senior partner who both supports and pressures Emily. Marcus Lee, a rising analyst eager to impress, but wary of office politics. See the high-stakes opportunity. Helix has landed an exclusive pitch meeting with a major Wall Street client, an account that could redefine the company's market position. Emily spearheads the most innovative solution, an AI-driven investment platform poised to disrupt the industry. She burns the midnight oil, refining her proposal, and trusts Jake to help perfect the proprietary algorithm and prep for the client presentation. D. Foreshadowing trouble. Odd red flags start to surface. Emily's confidential files mysteriously disappear from her drive, only to reappear out of order. Jake seems unusually tense and distant, often working late without her. She overhears fragmented conversations near the water cooler about someone making a big move. Still, she brushes off the unease, attributing it to pre-pitch nerves, her loyalty to Jake unwavering. E. The presentation and the plunge. Presentation day arrives. Helix's boardroom brims with executives, investors, and the coveted client. Emily's heart pounds as Jake, scheduled to introduce her, instead begins presenting the entire proposal as his own. Slide by slide, data point by data point, the project that Emily toiled over is delivered flawlessly by Jake. He thanks her tersely for support and deflects all follow-up questions to himself. F. The shock and immediate fallout. Whispers ripple across the room. The client seems impressed, but Helix's senior leadership looks to Emily for an explanation. Later that afternoon, legal and compliance officers summon Emily. She's accused of mishandling intellectual property with digital trails fabricated by Jake, pointing to breach of protocol. Her badge is deactivated. Security politely but firmly escorts her out, her belongings already packed in a cardboard box. Jake avoids Emily's eyes, surrounded now by colleagues who waste no time shifting their loyalty. G. The reality sinks in. Out on the sidewalk, New York's noise is deafening, but Emily feels numb, disoriented. Her phone buzzes relentlessly. Calls from concerned friends. Cryptic texts leaking rumors. News alerts already speculating on her downfall. Emily looks up at Helix's logo, shining 10 stories above, and vows, internally, that her story isn't ending here. Shattered and resolute. The shock aftermath. Emily returns to her now empty apartment that night, numb with disbelief. The ads, in stark contrast with her once busy schedule, is both foreign and suffocating. She plays voicemails, some from well-meaning friends who are cautious or unsure what to say, others from news outlets fishing for her comment on the scandal. A few, disappointingly, are from former colleagues expressing forced sympathy or keeping their distance. Media coverage escalates. Headlines speculate on her fall from grace, with anonymous insiders suggesting carelessness or ambition gone too far. Online forums and industry blogs feature heated debates about whether Emily was ever deserving of her rapid ascent. Personal fallout. Emily's parents call, concerned and heartbroken. Her mother's faith in her is unwavering, but her father's questions sting. How could you let this happen? Who can you trust? Friends from her Ivy League days and her professional network respond in varied ways. A few trusted confidants promise support, urging her to clear her name. Several distance themselves to protect their reputations or careers. Even some relatives suggest she should let it go and start over elsewhere. Emily's social feeds explode with opinions and speculation, forcing her to deactivate her accounts after reading one too many biting comments. She revisits memories, old photos of happier times with Jake, group achievements at Helix, and wrestles with feelings of betrayal, humiliation, and regret. Grieving and self-doubt. Days blur together. Emily experiences waves of sleeplessness, anxiety, and loss. She questions her own judgment. Did she push too hard? Should she have seen Jake's betrayal coming? Was her rise just luck? She seeks legal advice, but without solid evidence to clear her name. The language of corporate contracts feels cold and insurmountable. Isolation grows. She struggles with moments of anger toward Jake, the company, herself, but also shame. She resists calls from more aggressive journalists and declines a TV interview that seems more like a trap than genuine interest. A brewing resolve. Still, a stubborn spark inside her refuses to be doused. She remembers every late night, every success she genuinely earned. A mentor from early in her career, Layla, reaches out. Rather than pity, Layla offers two things: blunt honesty, you made enemies when you won, and now you see their faces. An encouragement to rewrite the script instead of letting others define Emily's story. Emily journals obsessively, filling pages with everything she lost, everything she now suspects. And gradually, the beginnings of new ideas. Turning point, the decision. The lowest point comes during a sleepless dawn, watching the skyline that once symbolized limitless opportunity. Emily realizes she has a choice: accept defeat and fade away, or channel her pain and outrage into building something new, not out of spite, but to reclaim her agency and remind herself and the world who she truly is. She drafts a list, proving her innocence one step at a time, rebuilding her reputation on her own terms, creating something that reflects her vision and integrity, not just for revenge, but for meaning. With that, Emily opens a fresh notebook and starts planning. The anger isn't gone, but it's cooled and focused. Motivation and clarity return. Slowly but surely, F closing. Beat of the chapter. She makes her first call to the only person she trusts wholly, her mother. She refreshes her resume, not to apply for jobs, but to assess her real worth and the assets she carries beyond any single corporation's approval. Emily looks into the mirror for the first time without flinching, seeing not a victim, but the future architect of her own comeback. The difficult new beginning. A. From rock bottom to first steps. Emily wakes each morning to uncertainty, but something within her insists on moving forward. The apartment that once felt like a prison now becomes her headquarters, even if all she owns is a laptop, a barely functional coffee maker, and her determination. She creates a daily routine, job searching, researching market gaps, teaching herself any new tech and startup skills she might lack, and most importantly, scanning LinkedIn for possible allies who aren't tainted by the Helix scandal. The financial reality hits hard. Severance is frozen due to legal investigations. Emily cancels every luxury, gym memberships, delivery meals, her cleaning service, retraining herself in the discipline of frugality and resilience. B. Mapping the vision. She dusts off old notebooks filled with brainstorms and unfinished business plans, combining the strongest elements into a pitch deck for a new company. This time, she focuses on transparency, fairness, and a tech solution that empowers overlooked clients. Naming the company is more difficult than expected. She wants a brand built on integrity, not revenge. Hours are spent searching domain names, sketching logos, and imagining what her vision might look like to future clients. Late at night, she makes a mind map on the wall, possible product features, market needs, competitive analysis, and in the corner, a list of mistakes made and lessons learned at Helix. C. Seeking investors and facing skepticism. Emily begins pitching to angel investors and venture capitalists, carefully staying away from those with close ties to Helix or who might view her as damaged goods. She endures condescending questions and thinly veiled references to her public fall, including, "Are you sure you're ready to start over? Why should we trust you with our capital?" Rejections pile up in her inbox. Some investors outright cancel meetings after checking her background. Others try to poach her ideas with little intention of backing her. A glimmer of hope arrives. A positive reply from an early-stage fund known for taking risks on second chances. The partner, a no-nonsense woman named Sophia, agrees to meet and listens intently, neither offering pity nor judgment. Building a team from scratch. Emily realizes no founder succeeds alone. She sifts through contacts, sending dozens of messages to potential co-founders and collaborators. Many replies are non-committal, but a handful remember working with her drive and passion. She reconnects with Marcus Lee, the rising analyst from Helix, who grew disillusioned with the old company's politics. Marcus is wary but intrigued, offering to consult part-time and vet technology partners. Scraping together a budget, Emily hires a freelance developer, Ava, a Brooklyn-based coder with startup scars of her own, on a project contract. Team meetings take place at tiny coffee shops, co-working spaces, or virtually, with everyone splitting time between side hustles and this risky venture that exists mostly on whiteboards and in Google Docs. Mistakes and miscommunications happen often. Features don't work as expected. There are heated debates over user experience, and once Emily comes close to losing her only developer due to a payment delay. Despite all this, small victories materialize. Their prototype finally passes its first live demo. A local business agrees to beta test the product. A skeptical beta user leaves a surprisingly glowing review, their feedback sparking optimism within the tiny team. Wrestling with detractors and inner doubt. Meanwhile, whispers about Emily's supposed failure still reverberate in the startup scene. A gossip blog runs a piece questioning her comeback, and a former Helix colleague posts a passive-aggressive status update hinting at her efforts. Emily has sleepless nights, wrestling with imposter syndrome, the memory of Jake's betrayal, and worry she may drag her new teammates into failure. She confides in her mother, who reminds her, You don't owe anyone a clean slate but yourself. Just build something that matters and let the rest take care of itself." She takes this advice to heart, journaling every win, no matter how small, and learning to silence both her external critics and her harsh internal voice. The first signs of momentum. Weeks of hard work finally yield their first real break. A respected tech journalist attending a startup showcase stays for their pitch instead of slipping out early. The piece that appears later isn't glowing, but it is fair, and it draws new attention. Sophia, the investor, offers a modest seed round, enough to keep the project alive and pay minimal stipends. She challenges Emily to prove traction within 3 months if they want more. Emily's team celebrates in a cheap diner, sharing pancakes and laughter over how far they've come from nothing. For the first time since her fall, she allows herself a rare flicker of pride and hope for what's next. Unveiling the truth. The city had changed for Emily. Where once skyscrapers looked like ladders to new heights, now their shadows felt like obstacles, reminders of everything she'd lost. But it was within these shadows, and within herself, that she resolved to find answers. For weeks, Emily worked by day to keep her fledgling company alive, but nights belonged to a very different mission, uncovering what Jake had done and how he turned Helix's tightly run world so decisively against her. Early doubts and intuition were no longer enough. She needed real proof. Initiating the hunt late one evening, Emily sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, surrounded by old notepads and a mug of bitter coffee. Her hands trembled, but her mind was sharp as ever. She listed out everything she remembered from her last weeks at Helix: missing files, suspicious messages, conversations Jake had tried to cut short, even office security desk chatter about badge logs and late-night visitors. She began by reaching out cautiously to former colleagues who might know more than they let on. Some, like Marcus Lee, answered her emails with wary caution. Emily left the meeting with a list of names and renewed determination. Digging into the digital, Emily knew her greatest chance for evidence lay somewhere in Helix's digital archives. But she was locked out, her badge invalid, and accounts terminated. Her only hope was Marcus. "If I got you access to the internal audit logs for that quarter," Marcus finally whispered over an encrypted call, "would you know what you're looking for?" Over the next several days, Marcus slipped her a series of documents via secure channels, log files, emails, and activity records. All were sanitized on the surface, but beneath the layers, Emily perceived patterns only she could recognize. File deletions, edits timestamped at hours she'd been offsite, logins traced to her account long after she'd left the building, coinciding exactly with when the pitch deck was finalized and Jake's access to her office for support had become routine. Old allies, new risks, emboldened. Emily set out to meet others who'd left Helix in the months following her departure. She arranged a clandestine rooftop meetup with Noah, a former IT consultant who'd always suspected Helix covered its tracks too well. Noah brought not just advice, but a backup drive, one he'd surreptitiously copied before resigning. Jake had someone in risk management scrubbing network records, Noah murmured, eyes darting around. But no one noticed the shadow files left behind on our old backup clusters. This isn't just about your project, Emily. There's a pattern of ideas quietly evaporating from less powerful teams. But you were the most visible, so they had to make an example out of you. The knowledge chilled her, but it clarified her mission. This wasn't just about personal revenge. It was about exposing a rot at the core of the company she once loved. High-stakes encounters. Every step brought danger. One day, after meeting with a former finance analyst, she returned to her apartment to find its door slightly ajar. Someone had gone through her files. Nothing was taken. At least nothing obvious. But her heart wouldn't stop pounding. The next morning, Emily received an anonymous email. The first breakthrough tracing document metadata. Emily discovered that several original files Jake had presented bore invisible traces of her authorship. Comments, previous draft saves, even her own inside jokes embedded in the code. She took screenshots, archived hard copies, doubly encrypted everything. Layla, ever the strategist, advised her to go public only when every piece fit. Half a story and they'll call you bitter. The whole truth, timelined, documented, impossible to refute, will force them to listen. Emily wanted to shout her innocence to the world. Instead, she waited, meticulously gathering, cross-referencing, and building her case, the role of the press. Knowing public opinion would be crucial, Emily contacted an investigative journalist, Samantha Chang, renowned for exposing tech industry scandals. Their first meeting was tense. Samantha was skeptical, used to jaded whistleblowers and half-baked vendettas. But as Emily laid out her files, logs, and backup archives, Samantha's interest sharpened. "If this holds up, we're looking at the story of the quarter," she said. "But I need more. I need someone from inside Helix who can corroborate this." Q Marcus, whose conscience and loyalty to Emily finally outweighed his fear. He supplied recorded Zoom calls in which Jake discussed restructuring the narrative and rewriting shared documents after hours. The showdown in silence. Through all this, Emily resisted the urge to confront Jake directly. In rare moments of self-doubt, she found herself rehearsing speeches in her empty living room, imagining every possible response: anger, denial, regret. But revenge, she knew now, would be empty if she didn't let the truth speak louder than any accusation. The closer Emily got to the truth, the more isolated she felt. Yet, for the first time, the solitude wasn't suffocating. She had purpose. Nights of fear had turned into nights of productivity. For every door that slammed in her face, another one, thanks to perseverance, Layla's advice, or Marcus's own slow burning courage, creaked open, preparation for exposure. Week after week, Emily and Samantha built the story, carefully vetting every detail. Timeline spreadsheets stretched down her apartment's walls, screenshot montages, annotated source code, recorded calls, all layered meticulously until the picture was impossible to ignore. Emily was adamant nothing would leak prematurely. She drafted a statement, both for the media and the broader tech community. Not a diatribe, but a call for accountability. This isn't about vengeance, she wrote, but about integrity, about a future where women's ideas can't be erased because someone more connected wants the credit. Chapter close. As the chapter concludes, Emily stands on her rooftop one rainy night, looking out over the city. The evidence, the interviews, the courage it's taken, all of it boils down to the next few days. Soon, the truth will be public, and with it, perhaps, a reckoning not just for Jake, but for a culture that fostered betrayal. In this pause before the storm, Emily feels exhaustion and terror, but also a pride she has never known. She realizes her greatest power isn't revenge, it's resilience, and the conviction that even when the world tries to silence you, the truth has its own voice. Rising and rebuilding the brand. Emily Carter had survived her storm. Now, standing in the dim light of her tiny new office, a space above a noisy deli with mismatched furniture and humming pipes, she let herself imagine what true rebuilding could look like. The city's din outside was no longer a threat. Instead, it felt like a backdrop, a low and steady promise of opportunity for those scrappy and smart enough to claim it. For Emily, this chapter was not about vengeance, but about reasserting her vision and values in a world that had tried to erase her. Foundations on integrity. Emily's first order of business was to shape her fledgling company into something that stood for the principles she once took for granted: transparency, ethics, and trust. She understood that every branding decision mattered, not just the logo or website, but how every client and employee was treated. She gathered her skeleton team, Marcus, Ava, and 2 other hires who shared a willingness to work odd hours for slim pay and bigger dreams. In the noisy conference room above the deli, they assembled a manifesto. Every client deserves to know the algorithms behind their investments. Every team member deserves a voice, and no idea will ever be claimed by someone else. These were more than words. They reviewed every workflow for fairness. They installed systems to meticulously track code authorship and decision histories. If Emily's legacy at Helix had been snatched away because systems were opaque, here she would build a business that made transparency a competitive advantage. B. A new brand launch. The next step was choosing the brand's public identity. Emily rejected every name that sounded like revenge. Instead, landing on the concept of Uplift Finance, a name that signified support, elevation, and second chances. She and Ava sketched the logo on the back of a napkin, a stylized upward arrow threaded through an open hand. Initial feedback from contacts was mixed. Some advised her to rebrand under a different name to avoid being associated with her controversy. but Emily refused to hide. "If my story comes up," she said, "let it come up on my terms. We're not running from my past, we're building from it." She ordered a bare-bones website and drafted an origin story that spoke frankly about lessons learned from betrayal, the value of ethical innovation, and the determination to chart a better path forward. C. Winning back clients. Success would require more than slogans. Most of Emily's previous corporate network now avoided her, but she started small, tenaciously contacting every former client who'd ever expressed dissatisfaction with Helix. Many didn't answer, some politely declined, leery of associating with what they saw as damaged goods. But a few remembered her genuine care and unbiased advice, and those first conversations meant everything. Emily arranged coffee meetings in bustling lobbies and video calls late at night for overseas contacts. She listened more than she pitched, determined to understand what frustrated clients about their current vendors. What she heard confirmed her convictions. They never explained their algorithms. "I feel like a number, not a partner. I can't get a straight answer about my account's performance." One breakthrough came when a mid-sized foundation, a client Emily had championed at Helix but lost in the fallout, agreed to pilot Uplift's platform. Marcus hustled to customize analytics dashboards, Ava debugged overnight, and Emily wrote every line of onboarding documentation herself. After a month, performance was steady, data was clear, and most critically, the client felt seen. Word trickled out quietly that Emily's team delivered as promised and picked up the phone when things went wrong. The victory was not only in revenue, but in reputation. For every client who stayed, another considered returning. D Smart campaigns and community building. Emily knew she needed to punch above her weight in marketing. With no budget for flashy ad spends, she went grassroots. Her team hosted free educational workshops on financial literacy in underserved neighborhoods, often with standing room attendance. Local news wrote a brief feature about a fallen Wall Street vice president teaching finance in the Bronx. Emily made sure every reporter received a press kit that emphasized Uplift's commitment to transparency and giving back. Their blog and social channels published stories of small business owners who'd previously felt shut out by big firms, now thriving with Uplift's tailored advice. Ava used her side skills as a videographer to shoot gritty, optimistic, 90-second client testimonials. Marcus reached out to his extensive LinkedIn network, turning every successful deal into another opportunity for word-of-mouth buzz. Slowly but surely, their brand stopped being synonymous with scandal. Instead, it represented innovation with a conscience. A local podcast even invited Emily for an interview. She told her story honestly, framing her mistakes as fuel rather than shame. The response was overwhelmingly positive, generating a few more inbound leads than their team could comfortably handle, mounting competitive pressure. Of course, not everyone welcomed Emily's comeback. Jake, still riding high at Helix, caught word that former clients, even Helix veterans, were quietly defecting. He tightened terms for customers, ramped up competitor bashing in meetings, and sent pointed messages to shared contacts that Emily was wide open to legal scrutiny. Uplift's website suffered a targeted bot attack. The messages didn't name Jake, but Emily knew better. Instead of responding in kind, she doubled down on transparency. "We welcome any questions about our business practices." We have nothing to hide. There were other hurdles. A major pitch nearly fell apart when an old rumor resurfaced on a hostile finance blog. A few overworked teammates briefly considered quitting, fearing a career backlash if things went south. Emily held a candid team meeting in the cramped conference room, acknowledging the uncertainty but reaffirming her faith. Yes, the risk is real and the fight is exhausting, but we're building something together that no one can take away from us. Early triumphs. Resilience paid off. By the end of the quarter, Uplift had quietly signed 4 substantial clients, including a regional credit union and a promising tech nonprofit. They weren't market giants, but they validated the company's approach. With each win, Emily made a point to celebrate. Cheap pizza, sparkling water, and small bonuses that meant the world to a team used to scraping by. As LinkedIn testimonials accumulated and quarterly results came in, the startup world, once eager to dismiss or pity Emily, took notice. Looking forward, late one evening, as the city lights flickered beneath her window, Emily realized how much her sense of achievement had evolved. It wasn't about headlines or gloating over Jake or Helix. It was about doing the work, lifting people up, and refusing to vanish. She hadn't just rebuilt her reputation, she'd rebuilt herself, stronger and steadier, foundation by foundation, with the next round of investor meetings looming and clients advocating for her brand. Emily finally allowed herself a genuine, hard-won smile. She was no longer staring up at glass ceilings, but looking out at a horizon she had shaped herself. Face-to-face confrontation. The city's pulse quickened as autumn deepened. Days briefer, evenings sharper, business ambitions at a fever pitch. Emily Carter's new company was hitting its stride, but every victory came with a shadow. She knew that at some point, the silent, cutthroat rivalry between her and Jake couldn't just play out in whispers or coded messages. It would have to be confronted, out loud, in public, with consequences neither of them could fully control. Early skirmishes. The first direct blow was subtle but unmistakable. Uplift Finance made the shortlist for a statewide fintech accelerator program, one that could legitimize a young startup overnight. Jake, now a partner at Helix, was lined up as a keynote speaker and judge. Emily noticed the shift in the air immediately. Mentors and even some clients grew cautious, asking pointed questions about Uplift's risk exposure or its CEO's history. Anonymous emails popped up in selection committee inboxes, each one dredging up the old scandal, casting doubts about Emily's character. Unbowed, Emily pushed back. She sent a letter to the committee, not defensive, but proud, outlining Uplift's transparent systems and unique social mission. During a public interview, she stared straight into the camera. Every founder makes mistakes. Real leaders own both their scars and their successes. The clip went viral among local entrepreneurs, earning praise for its honesty while infuriating her critics. B-market clashes and professional duels. Jake escalated matters with ruthless precision. Helix began quietly underbidding Uplift on key contracts, dropping their fees to unsustainable lows, just long enough to block Emily from building relationships with certain clients. At a major tech summit, both companies were co-sponsors. Emily arrived to find Helix's booth decked out with slogans that skewered her platform's untested algorithms and lack of institutional trust. Jake himself worked the crowd, pitching with a shark's grin. "When you want experience, you call us." When you want drama, you know where to look. That afternoon, Emily had her own panel. Instead of running from the barbs, she turned them inside out. Do trust and safety have to be luxuries in finance? She asked the room. Or can transparency and new perspectives actually prevent the kinds of systemic risks we've seen, even at the largest firms? She referenced, pointedly, but without naming him, the dangers of groupthink and old boys networks. The applause was earnest, and after her session, 2 small business clients signed on with Uplift that very week. See the industry conference showdown. The slow burn reached flashpoint at the annual Manhattan Financial Leadership Conference, a gathering so prominent that the city's major outlets sent live reporters. Emily was to debate innovation versus tradition on a panel opposite Jake. The room was standing room only, with every seat filled, phones at the ready, everyone waiting to see sparks fly. Each opening statement was polite, a chess game played with smiles, but the tension built with each point. Jake extolled Helix's record of market stability and longevity. Fintech is about trust, the kind you can only earn with decades of success. Emily's retort was crisp. Trust is earned daily, not inherited. Legacy alone doesn't guard against complacency or abuse. The moderator lobbed the question everyone was waiting for. How should the industry handle internal failures, scandals, betrayals, ethical lapses? Jake's response skewed condescending. Mistakes are inevitable. What matters is that you have teams and systems in place to contain and correct them. Leadership means accountability when, if, mistakes happen. Emily did not flinch. Sometimes, when the system itself enables the failure, you don't sweep it under a rug. You step outside, even if it costs you everything. She paused, voice steady but eyes blazing. And then you build new systems, the ones that don't allow those failures to persist, that elevate ideas from every seat at the table, not just from those who have always had power. The exchange ricocheted across social media before the panel even ended, a dozen bloggers live tweeting as the crowd leaned in, de-escalating tactics and personal stakes. The fallout was immediate. Jake, no longer able to ignore Emily's growing influence, authorized Helix's legal team to research any angle for a lawsuit against Uplift, accusations of IP infringement, false claims, conflicts of interest. Emily found herself buried under paperwork, discovery requests, and veiled threats that any investor would face significant reputational and legal risk backing her company. At the same time, Emily's team came under pressure. Ava's old colleagues at a tech firm got cryptic calls about her side jobs. Marcus's LinkedIn inbox filled with warnings from anonymous accounts. The relentless pressure caused tempers to flare and doubts to surface among her staff. Was all this really worth it? In private, Emily struggled to balance leadership and vulnerability. She reassured her crew over late-night pizza and cold coffee that every challenge we face now is proof we scare them. The only thing that could really defeat us is giving up. One final confrontation. All of it came to a head one rainy Friday night. After an investor pitch, Emily stepped outside to find Jake waiting by the curb, coat collar up, smirk in place. Making quite a splash, Carter. But you know how this ends, don't you? He posed, voice low and loaded with threat. Emily held her, ground, rain streaking her hair and jacket. No, Jake, you don't get to write my ending this time. That's not your story to finish. He took a step closer. You can walk away, maybe start over somewhere else. Or you can keep this ridiculous fight going and risk dragging everyone you care about under. Instead of yielding, Emily's voice was calm and unwavering. Helix thrived by silencing people, Jake. That era's ending. If you're afraid of what we're building, maybe you should be. Jake's mask slipped for a split second, pride faltering under uncertainty. Careful, Emily. Not everyone is as loyal as you think. She looked him straight in the eye. Maybe not, but for the first time, I'm not pretending otherwise. And I'm not afraid to stand alone. With that, she left him in the rain, steps unhurried, shoulders squared. F closing beat. Word of the public confrontations and legal maneuvering spread rapidly in fintech circles. Helix's hard-edged campaign began to draw criticism from industry observers who noted the company's pattern of aggressive silencing of competitors and whistleblowers. Uplift's transparency pledge and underdog status drew more allies than before, with a handful of former Helix clients and even one well-known partner quietly reaching out. Alone in her office that Sunday evening, Emily looked at the city's glittering skyline. Her fear was still there, but now it lived alongside a fierce sense of possibility. She knew that direct confrontation would not solve everything. But it had finally broken the old narrative. She wasn't the upstart survivor anymore. She was a true challenger. And the battle was hers to shape, networks and support. Emily had always believed that grit could get her anywhere. Now, though, ambition alone could only get her so far. She understood, with hard-won humility, that no founder truly stood alone, especially not after taking on an adversary as entrenched as Jake and as powerful as the Helix empire. As Uplift Finance waded into the next chapter of its evolution, the necessity of building and leaning on networks, personal, professional, and even unlikely, became clearer and more urgent than ever. A shift in perspective. After months of operating in survival mode, Emily finally found space to reflect. One evening, while penning thank you notes to her scrappy team, she came to a quiet realization. The greatest competitive moat wasn't technical or regulatory, it was trust. But trust required alliances, and alliances grew from roots deeper than a business card swap at a conference. Intentionally, she mapped out her sphere of influence. There were old friends from grad school who'd once drifted away, competitors she'd admired from afar, ex-clients still monitoring Uplift's resurrection, and of course, those who'd once considered Emily a pariah, but now sensed something new growing in her approach. She resolved to repair, nurture, or simply risk new forms of connection. B. Rekindling old ties. Emily started reclaiming her network with humility and honesty. She reached out to Carla Evans, a former Helix marketing strategist who had left after growing frustrated with political games. To Emily's surprise, Carla responded warmly, agreeing to meet over coffee. At their first meeting, an apology hung in the air, both women aware of sharp words exchanged back when corporate survival was every person for themselves. By the end of the conversation, Carla agreed to audit Uplift's branding pro bono and introduced Emily to a digital PR community she trusted. Buoyed by this success, Emily reconnected with Michael Tran, an early software mentor, long ago lost to the demands of scaling fast. Michael, now CTO at a respected fintech competitor, shared frank insights, sometimes critical, always supportive. Don't try to out-helix Helix, he warned. Build the company you wish existed when you were at your lowest. See building support from allies and former adversaries. As Emily's profile grew, so did curiosity from unexpected quarters. Once Jake's allies, some began reaching out, publicly or discreetly. Neha Patel, a renowned compliance lead who had once opposed Emily on key decisions, surprised her with a LinkedIn message. I was wrong about you. Let's talk. Over lunch downtown, Neha explained, I watched how you handled Jake's attacks. Most people would have cracked or lashed out, but you channeled it. That takes more than resilience. It takes principle. Let me help you build your compliance framework, pro bono, if you want it ironclad. Their collaboration, initially tentative, grew into a cornerstone of Uplift's credibility. Neha's directness and professional reputation inspired confidence in investors still scarred by the Helix mudslinging. On the investor front, more doors began to creak open. Sophia, the tough early-stage backer who'd first believed in Emily post-scandal, arranged a breakfast with two influential venture partners from LA. Both had weathered their own reputation storms, and both now admired Uplift's transparent metrics and ethical branding. While hesitant to commit major capital, they offered the next best thing: relationships. Warm introductions led to meetings with compliance testers, cybersecurity experts, and industry lobbyists eager for reform. D. Community and radical collaboration. Uplift's new community strategy went beyond traditional networking. Marcus championed a mentorship program pairing young data scientists in underrepresented city neighborhoods with tech pros from Uplift's network. Ava organized late-night coding jams, an open invite to students, freelancers, and even rivals looking to cross-pollinate ideas. Emily herself began leading roundtables for fellow fallen founders. Here, battered entrepreneurs exchange cautionary tales and practical tactics. What if we made transparency a movement, not just a business edge? Emily posed one evening. Slowly, a grassroots alliance took shape, one that not only supported Uplift, but seeded a new potential lobbying group. Among this ecosystem, Emily discovered a surprising wellspring of solidarity. Ella, a Brooklyn cafe owner once skeptical of fintech altogether, became an advocate after Uplift's team helped her recover from a predatory loan. She organized a Fintech for Good breakfast series, attracting press and new small business clients. Everywhere Emily went, she strove to repay support with support. Her policy: never hoard connections. Referrals flowed, whether or not they directly benefited Uplift. This spirit of abundance quietly rebelled against Helix's notorious culture of gatekeeping. E. Navigating the political and public stage. The growing network brought new visibility and new risks. As Uplift's client list broadened and public approval mounted, so did scrutiny. Jake's camp ramped up efforts behind closed doors, sending legal queries in bulk and planting negative stories in industry blogs. But now, Uplift was not alone. A coalition of small businesses penned an open letter lauding Emily's advocacy on their behalf. The mentorship cohort drafted their own piece, a social media thread that went viral, gathering the attention of sympathetic politicians. An influential city councilwoman invited Emily to co-sponsor a Tech for Everyone initiative, underscoring how much perception had shifted. More than a handful of wary investors now wanted in, and Emily, newly wary but optimistic, welcomed them on her terms. At major industry events, the tone around Emily changed. Where once she'd felt eyes slide away or catch on whispered rumors, now she found herself approached with respect, sometimes even awe. Those who'd once shunned her now extended invitations to speak, serve on judging panels, or mentor aspiring founders. The limits and strength of connection network, of course, did not mean invulnerability. Emily faced betrayal even within her expanding circle. A junior consultant attempted to leak product roadmaps to a competitor. A supposed ally tried to poach Marcus with promises of stock options at a rival upstart. Each incident stung, but Emily learned. She refined her inner circle, double-checked her trust, and kept a healthy skepticism without descending into paranoia. Through it all, Emily remained committed to transparency as both shield and sword. When setbacks occurred, she owned them openly in team meetings and sometimes on public platforms. Rather than secrecy, it was vulnerability that kept genuine allies close. Closing. Beat. Interwoven strength. The climax of this chapter came not with a single deal or partnership, but with the realization that Uplift's web of support had grown larger and more resilient than even she'd dreamed possible. Not only had her own reputation recovered, but she'd become nexus point for others seeking to challenge the status quo. Late one night, after a marathon call with an overseas partner, Emily paused by her office window. New York glimmered far below. Instead of loneliness, she felt a quiet thrum, a sense of herself as both spider and silk in a wide, intricate web. The future remained uncertain. Attacks and betrayals would surely continue. But Emily no longer saw the journey as a solo climb up a treacherous peak. She was part of a living network of trust, and together they were changing the very rules of the game. The truth is exposed. The city always looks different in the moments before something seismic happens. For Emily Carter, those moments crackled with palpable tension. The air was steely with autumn chill, but the city's pulse seemed to mirror her own. Quickened, nervous, expectant. It had been months of tireless nights, facts gathered, files recovered, allies found and tested. Now the long shadow of doubt that had dogged her ever since her downfall at Helix was about to be dispelled by the hard, unyielding light of truth. The final countdown. The final push began with Samantha Chang, the investigative journalist Emily had first contacted in secrecy. For weeks, the pair had worked closely but quietly, corroborating data and cross-checking witness accounts. Emily's apartment had become a command post. Sticky notes and timelines covered the walls, every document triple encrypted and duplicated off-site. "I want to get this right," Samantha warned as she reviewed the draft exposé, her voice low but certain. "A single, unverified fact, and they'll spin it to make you look petty or vengeful or out of touch. But this," she gestured at the trove of evidence, "if it holds up, we'll force them to listen." Emily had never been so aware of her own vulnerability, or so resolved. She double-checked every piece of code, every timestamp, and every message, some laced with Jake's all-too-casual directives to rewrite the past. It wasn't about personal vengeance anymore. It was about restoring her own name. But more importantly, it was about making sure Helix's culture of theft and silencing would finally come to light. Be allies and leaping into public view. The days leading up to publication were torturous. Rumors swirled. Someone on the Helix board seemed to know the story was coming. Lawyers sent ominous emails to Samantha's newsroom, including thinly veiled threats of lawsuits, not only for defamation, but breach of confidentiality, even conspiracy. But thanks to allies like Marcus and Layla, both of whom offered sworn affidavits and internal communications, Samantha's editor stood strong. Meanwhile, Emily's team at Uplift had wind of what was brewing, but kept their heads down, focusing on clients, steeling themselves for the wave that was sure to come. Emily herself reached out in private to a handful of trusted clients, giving them advance warning that her name, and by extension, Uplift's, was about to be at the center of a media storm. Most offered encouragement. One or two quietly froze their accounts, waiting to see if the scandal would deepen or settle. Emily could feel the city's gaze turning her way. Old friends, family, rivals, even teachers from her past, sending her cautious messages of support, curiosity, or in a few cases, resignation. She wondered which of them, after all this, would recognize her as the woman who had stood her ground, or simply still see her as someone marked by controversy. C. The publication, an immediate backlash. It dropped at dawn, a bombshell expose, front page of the biggest finance and tech papers, every blog and aggregator soon buzzing with the headline, "Screenshots from chat logs, emails with Jake's digital fingerprints, security badge audit logs, proving Emily couldn't have tampered with files the way she'd been accused, and inside jokes hidden in the code, all substantiated by Marcus's testimony, every piece lined up with damning precision." Predictably, Helix's PR machine fired back instantly, denying all wrongdoing and hinting at a personal vendetta fueled by ego and past failures. Jake, interviewed by a more sympathetic outlet, called the article grossly exaggerated and a distraction from real issues in the industry. He tried to deflect by offering industry platitudes about focus on client value and moving forward. But something was different now. The evidence wasn't abstract or elusive. It was visual, granular, real. Tech insiders who recognized Emily's work from years ago backed her up on industry message boards. Others who had left Helix quietly began to reach out with their own stories of mysterious project disappearances and credit gone missing. Insider data, Helix betrayal, and the erasure of a visionary. Within hours, social media erupted. The article detailed Helix's coordinated smear against Emily, Jake's calculated theft of her intellectual property, and the evidence of a deeper pattern of ideas stolen from rising talents, nearly all of them women and people of color. D. Legal and corporate fallout. Within a day, the Helix board was forced into crisis meetings as the company's stock price slipped. Investors, always jittery about scandal, started pulling out, demanding an independent internal investigation. The media exposed still more stories, some going back years, broadening the picture from a single betrayal to a company culture rotten to its core. Attorneys general and industry compliance officers entered the scene. Jake was placed on immediate leave, as were several executives named in the story's footnotes. Examining digital logs supplied in the exposé, compliance officers found evidence of cover-ups, retroactive file edits, and further tampering to hide the scale of the theft. For Emily, the surge was dizzying. Legal teams contacted her with reassurances and requests as she and her own counsel weighed next steps, damages, apologies, or perhaps testifying in wider regulatory hearings against Helix in similar corporations. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted, if only slightly, and maybe only for a moment. The human cost and validation, none of this was clean triumph for Emily. She woke to hundreds of messages, the majority of them supportive, but many laced with disbelief, suspicion, or outright abuse. There were dark jokes in financial circles, memes ricocheting around Twitter, and think pieces questioning whether Emily was out for justice or just the spotlight. But for every hater or doubter, there were more who wrote to say she had given them hope. New founders, ex-colleagues, women and minorities across industries who had lost credit or been erased themselves. Her mother's call, shaky with pride, cracked Emily's composure for the first time in weeks. I always told you the truth would come through. It hurts, but it matters, Emmy. Around her, Uplift's team rallied. Some clients pulled away, wary of volatility, but others doubled down, grateful for her stand against the industry's worst habits. Journalists who had once dismissed her now sought her insight on the future of ethical innovation. For the first time, the city felt more like an ally than a courtroom. Jake's downfall and the industry's reckoning, Jake's public image, already shaky, collapsed quickly. Former friends distanced themselves. Stories broke about his notorious office scheming, and a senior Helix partner described his pattern of appropriating others' work. Lawsuits and countersuits stacked up, and Jake, isolated and disgraced, retreated from public view. But what mattered most to Emily was not Jake's suffering, but the precedent. The industry was suddenly forced to reckon with a question it long ignored: who gets credit and who decides whose voice is remembered? The regulator's probe widened, resulting in promises, however belated, for better internal controls, stronger anti-retaliation measures, and new watchdog groups advocating for creators' rights. The aftermath. As the week bled into weekend, Emily found herself back at her apartment window, gazing at dawn streaking through the towers. The cost had been enormous. Personal reputation scarred, years of work undone and redone, trust hard-won, and innocence left behind. But there was clarity, too. The truth, once released, was bigger than her, fuel for change, not just a weapon for personal redemption. With her name restored and her past finally put in the light, Emily Carter could start to imagine a future not dictated by what had been done to her, but by what she chose to build next. The pinnacle of revenge, cold victory. New York, once the backdrop to Emily Carter's humiliation, now pulsed to a new rhythm, her rhythm. In the wake of the Helix expose, her story had become legend, told and retold. In boardrooms, on podcasts, around late-night dinners, Emily's name was everywhere. The visionary wronged, the agile disruptor, the face of financial fairness. If the previous year had been about clawing back a shred of dignity, this new era was about Emily's ascent to the very peak of the city's business mountain. The summit. Unmistakable success. Within weeks, Uplift Finance became the golden child of the fintech world. Leads arrived unsolicited. Investors who had once ghosted Emily now begged for meetings, waving term sheets and promises of partnership. The company's client roster ballooned, from scrappy small businesses to established foundations, even a marquee nonprofit that had formerly shunned controversy. Mentions of Jake's betrayal faded into the background as Uplift made headlines for product breakthroughs, community advocacy, and record setting customer retention. With every win, the walls of Emily's modest office echoed with the energy of expansion. New teams hired, new markets entered, late night strategy sessions coiled with excitement. Reporters asked for comment. Business schools requested Emily as a guest lecturer. Awards for innovation soon crowded the shelf above her hand-me-down desk. Yet, amid the gleam, it was a strange kind of victory. It was everything she had visualized: the respect, the independence, the market relevance. But now that she'd reached the mountaintop, Emily felt a coldness drifting in, something that pride couldn't quite thaw. B. Jake's downfall, watching from a distance. Jake's unraveling was dramatic, but it happened far from Emily's direct involvement. Investigations swarmed Helix, board members resigned in disgrace, and class action lawsuits mounted. Jake himself became a pariah in an industry where connections are currency. Former allies gave exclusive interviews about his toxic competitiveness and pattern of stealing glory from subordinates. Some expected Emily to revel in his collapse, but she kept a measured distance. She watched news banners scroll with his name, but the old urge to see him suffer had faded. Her silence wasn't for his sake, but her own. She knew deeply that her greatest triumph wasn't Jake's failure, but the proof that she had flourished anyway. See cold triumph, what success cannot restore. As laurels piled up, so did moments of strange emptiness. Emily's days were booked edge to edge, her inbox overflowing with opportunities and obligations. Former enemies came crawling back, hoping for a seat at the now coveted Uplift table. At first, Emily was tempted to close doors and issue payback. But something inside resisted the pettiness. She found herself looking around at her new office, a sleek midtown high-rise, the windows framing the city she'd once feared, and feeling detached. The applause was loud, but it sounded filtered, as if underwater. Some of her original team had burned out or moved on, unable to keep pace with Uplift's meteoric rise. The fight had changed them all. Even Marcus, who remained steadfast, seemed quieter, more mature in the hard-bitten way that comes from surviving something enormous. Late at night, after celebration dinner, honoring Uplift's Company of the Year award, Emily stood alone at the office window. Below flickered the urban grid, a million pinpricks of light. This was the view she'd once sacrificed everything for, the dream of a summit reached. But now the city felt less like a trophy and more like a reminder. Victory can sometimes feel as isolating as defeat. D. The world's perception. From pariah to paragon, Emily's public image transformed with astonishing speed. Magazine covers labeled her the comeback queen and text conscience. She was offered a place on regulatory boards and invited to private summits with political leaders discussing industry reforms. Her mentor, Layla, dryly joked that Emily had become the one everyone wants to be photographed beside. Yet Emily knew how quickly tides turn. She never completely trusted the adulation. She reminded her team, both old and new, that reputation is rented, not owned. We lead with integrity, not because it's trendy, but because it's who we are. And if the world forgets tomorrow, our work will still mean something. Encounters with the past. Occasionally, relics of Emily's earlier life drifted back. At a charity gala, she ran into former colleagues, some brimming with apology, others awkwardly pivoting the conversation from the messy Helix era. Emily responded graciously, but held her boundaries. She neither basked in their admiration nor indulged their regrets. One chilly evening, an anonymous note arrived at the office. It was a simple line: "Were you right or just lucky?" There was no signature, but Emily didn't need one. She smiled, folded the note, and slipped it into her desk drawer. A reminder that revenge, once chased, never truly satisfies. Internal reflection. Bittersweet power. Emily understood now the paradox of total victory. She had fought to be heard and to clear her name, yes, but also for a greater ideal, a system where no one could erase another's ideas with impunity. Her win was bigger than Jake, or even Helix. It was a wedge in a wall of silence that had stood for decades. And yet, she felt the chill of ambition realized. Jake's collapse brought her no personal comfort. The applause was fleeting. The real rewards came from the work, the relationships rebuilt, the young founders, Uplift now mentored. These connections, not the headlines, formed the warmth at the center of her new life. In moments of solitude, Emily allowed herself to grieve, briefly, for the naive dreamer she'd been at the start of it all. She had lost a kind of innocence forever, but in its place was an earned, colder wisdom and a platform she had shaped with her own hands. Looking to tomorrow as winter deepened, so did Emily's awareness that a new chapter beckoned. She met with activists, regulators, and even rivals to discuss meaningful systemic reforms. Uplift launched an initiative to fund women and minority founders, turning the cold energy of revenge into something generative for others. Emily gazed out at the frost-lined cityscape, no longer needing vindication from any boardroom, editor, or crowd. Her victory was real, but so was its loneliness, a metallic taste to even the sweetest success. She had reached the pinnacle of revenge, but as she looked to tomorrow, she quietly resolved that her next summit wouldn't be about besting someone else. It would be about lifting others up, and perhaps one day finding a sense of peace warmer than even the grandest, coldest triumph. An open ending, the value of forgiveness and new beginnings. The city was gray and dim the morning Emily Carter decided to revisit the old Helix Tower. She hadn't walked that block in almost a year. But today, with the worst behind her and something new stirring inside, she felt ready to close the loop, not with bitterness, but as a gentle goodbye to the woman she'd been when it all began. The skyscraper's mirrored glass reflected both clouds and progress, and Emily's own image stared back. Older, a touch wearier, but also wise, in a way no past accolade could convey. A reflection. What was lost and learned for months after the storm. No apology or victory had erased the sting of betrayal or the endless worry that it could all happen again. Now, in this unexpected stillness, Emily finally allowed herself to reckon with what the chaos had taken and what it had given her. She saw clearly the arc of her journey, from ambitious prodigy to scapegoat to survivor, and finally to architect of something entirely her own. The price had been steep, friendships unraveled, trust hard won, and innocence irrevocably lost. But time, it turned out, was a better healer than any repentance or retribution. Where a year ago she had nursed her anger and plotted vindication, now she weighed that anger against the life she was building, asking herself what it really meant to win. Looking across the street, Emily recognized herself in a young woman hurrying through the revolving doors, nervous, sharp-eyed, full of plans. She quietly hoped that wherever that young woman was headed, she would never have to learn the lessons Emily did at such cost. The long journey to forgiveness. Forgiving Jake or any of Helix's enablers was never something Emily considered possible. Rage had been fuel, justifying her tenacity, keeping her moving when hope ran dry. Yet, as months carried her further from the scandal, the edges of even her most painful memories softened. Jake was gone from the industry now, his fate mostly unknown. There were rumors, a failed consultancy, a teaching gig, a retreat into obscurity. Sometimes Emily caught herself searching his name, more out of curiosity than resentment, and found only silence staring back. Oddly, this absence brought no joy. In the quiet, she came to understand that true forgiveness was not exoneration and not forgetting. It was simply setting the burden down so that it could no longer shape her days or keep her up at night. Her therapist had put it plainly. Forgiveness doesn't mean he was right. It means you choose your future over your hurt. At first, Emily resisted, but the more she flourished on her own terms, the more she realized how little Jake, or any adversary, deserved a place in her mind. One spring weekend, she wrote but never sent a letter to Jake. She didn't offer absolution, but neither did she curse him. "We are both more than the worst thing we did to each other," she wrote. After saving the letter, she finally felt the weight shift, imperceptible but real. Uplift's new chapter. Meanwhile, Uplift was thriving beyond any revenge fantasy Emily once harbored. The company had grown not just in revenue or reach, but in the depth of its purpose. Marcus, now co-founder in More Than Name, oversaw a mentorship initiative for diverse founders. Ava led a project that aimed to demystify financial tech for immigrant-owned businesses, translating guides into 4 new languages. Emily's days were spent less in firefighting and more in nurturing, investing in people, culture, and new partnerships with organizations once hesitant to be associated with her storm-scarred name. Every week, Uplift found new allies, some inspired by the company's rise, others eager to participate in its model of transparency and shared credit. A feature in a national magazine described Emily not as the woman Helix tried to erase, but as a builder of a future where finance restores trust, not simply profit. The phrase stuck with her. When asked by a room full of young founders what she wished she'd known at the beginning, she answered honestly that your story isn't finished just because you lose the plot for a while. Sometimes that's when a new narrative starts. Reclaiming relationships and making amends. The fallout of public disgrace had ended more than Emily's first career. It had frayed or severed relationships she once believed unbreakable. In the years since, some old friends had drifted back, tentatively curious about Emily's new role. She did not turn anyone away, but neither did she pretend nothing had changed. Rebuilding trust, she realized, was an act of humility and patience, not just with others, but with herself. She reached out to Layla, her longtime mentor, for the first time since the expose. They met in the same coffee shop where Layla had pushed her to rewrite the script. This time, their conversation was slower, less fortified by pride or expectation. Layla told her, "You fought not to be right, but to be whole. That's a rarer thing than most people chase." Emily started hosting monthly gatherings for women who had survived similar professional betrayals. They didn't always talk shop. Sometimes they just swapped stories, shared awkward silences, or toasted quietly to endurance. These new bonds, fragile but genuine, became Emily's unexpected source of joy. The door that's never quite closed. In business, closure is an illusion. Risks never end, and neither do rumors. There were days when a stray headline would trigger a pang of dread. Yet Emily learned not to brace herself with anger, but to lean into grace. She answered critics with open data, not fire. She folded setbacks into lessons, not just for herself, but for her whole team. Her own ambitions began to shift. A seed of restlessness stirred within her, a longing she hadn't known since before Helix, the urge not just to lead, but to learn anew. She considered launching a venture fund to support women founders or partnering with schools to teach digital ethics. The point, increasingly, was not to prove anything to anyone, but to make a difference, however quietly. Looking forward, the open ending. On the anniversary of her lowest day, Emily walked the Brooklyn Bridge at dawn, the skyline glowing at her back. She pulled from her pocket the list she once scrawled of things to prove: innocence, worth, meaning. Rolling the paper between her fingers, she let the wind tug it free. Not because the past was gone, but because she finally believed it no longer defined her. Her future lay open, shimmering with uncertainty. Uplift's story was just beginning. Her own story, too. She had made peace with the fact that answers don't always come. Injuries don't always heal as we wish. And forgiveness, especially of oneself, is a lifelong practice. But she also accepted that possibility, not closure, was what made life worth living. As she crossed the last span of the bridge and the sun tipped over the city, Emily felt gratitude, not for the battles won, but for the wisdom to move forward unburdened. She had learned, finally, that the greatest victory was not revenge, but the courage to start again.